Kira's wooden sword clattered to the ground for the third time that morning. Sweat dripped from her forehead as she bent to pick it up, ignoring the snickers from the other trainees behind her. The training yard of the Royal Academy buzzed with the sounds of clashing weapons and shouted commands, but all Kira could hear was the disappointment in Instructor Valdrick's voice. Again, Ashford, Valdrick barked, his scarred face twisted in frustration. Your footwork is sloppy, your grip is weak, and your timing is completely off. How do you expect to graduate next month if you can't even hold your weapon properly? Kira wiped her palms on her training tunic and repositioned herself. Around her, 20 other students moved through their sword forms with practiced ease. Marcus Thornfield, the captain of their class, spun his blade in a perfect arc that would have severed 3 heads in real combat. Elena Brightwater danced through her routine like a deadly ballerina, each movement flowing seamlessly into the next. Even Tommy Millwright, who had started training 6 months after Kira, could execute the basic forms without dropping his weapon. She was the worst student in her class. Everyone knew it. The instructors whispered about her during breaks, wondering how someone with such poor natural ability had even been accepted into the academy. Her fellow students had long since stopped trying to help her, tired of her consistent failures. Some days, Kira wondered the same thing herself. Focus, Ashford. Valdrick's voice cut through her thoughts. The enemy won't wait for you to daydream. Kira raised her sword again, trying to remember the sequence. Left foot forward, blade high, step, and strike. But as she moved, her foot caught in a loose stone. She stumbled, her sword arm flailing wildly as she tried to regain balance. The wooden blade flew from her grip, sailing across the yard to land with a loud thunk against the academy's stone wall. The training yard fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes stared at her, some amused, others pitying. Marcus shook his head with barely concealed disgust. Elena looked away, embarrassed for her. Tommy actually started laughing, quickly covering his mouth when Valdrick shot him a glare. That's enough for today, Valdrick said quietly, his voice heavy with resignation. Ashford, report to my office after evening meal. The rest of you, continue with paired sparring. Kira's face burned with shame as she retrieved her sword. She could feel everyone watching as she walked to the equipment rack, their silent judgment heavier than any spoken criticism. As she placed her weapon with the others, she caught sight of her reflection in the polished blade. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes, and her brown hair hung limp with sweat. She looked as defeated as she felt. The rest of the day passed in a blur of academic classes where Kira excelled. Military history, strategy, logistics, these subjects came naturally to her. She could recite the details of famous battles, analyze troop movements, and calculate supply requirements faster than any of her classmates. But none of that mattered if she couldn't swing a sword without dropping it. During the evening meal in the Great Hall, Kira sat alone at the end of one of the long wooden tables. The other students clustered in their usual groups, their conversations animated as they discussed the day's training. She picked at her stew, barely tasting the thick bread that accompanied it. Her stomach churned with anxiety about the upcoming meeting with Valdrick. Heard you're getting kicked out, Marcus said, sliding onto the bench across from her. His friends flanked him on either side, their expressions ranging from amused to cruel. About time, really. You've been dragging down our class scores all year. The Academy has standards, added Helena Darkmoor, one of Marcus's followers. It's not fair to the rest of us that they let just anyone in. Kira kept her eyes on her bowl, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. She had learned long ago that fighting back only made things worse. Better to endure their taunts than give them more ammunition. I bet she bought her way in, suggested another student, Garrett Stonehall. Daddy probably made a big donation to get his precious daughter into warrior training. They made Kira look up. Her parents had died when she was 12, killed in a border raid. She had no family wealth, no connections, nothing but a letter of recommendation from the village elder and her own desperate determination to become strong enough to protect others for what had happened to her family. "Leave her alone," said a quiet voice from behind them. They turned to see Finn Blackwood, one of the middle-ranked students, approaching with his dinner tray. He wasn't particularly skilled with a blade, but he was steady and reliable, the kind of soldier who would hold the line when things got desperate. "Mind your own business, Blackwood," Marcus sneered. "We're just having a friendly conversation." "Didn't sound very friendly to me," Finn replied, settling beside Kira despite the hostile glares from Marcus's group. "Besides, graduation trials are still a month away. Anything could happen." Marcus stood, his hand moving instinctively to where his sword would hang if they were allowed weapons in the dining hall. "Careful, Blackwood. You don't want to tie yourself to a sinking ship." After they left, Finn turned to Kira with a sympathetic expression. "Don't let them get to you. Valdrick's bark is worse than his bite." But Kira knew better. She had seen other students called to private meetings with instructors. They never came back to class. The academy didn't waste time on failures, not when there were dozens of qualified candidates waiting for every open spot. The kingdom needed warriors, not deadweight. As the sun set behind the academy's towers, Kira made her way through the stone corridors to Valdrick's office. Her footsteps echoed hollowly off the walls, each sound seeming to count down the moments until her dismissal. The hallways were lined with portraits of famous graduates, generals, and heroes who had brought glory to the realm. Their painted eyes seemed to judge her as she passed, finding her lacking. Valdrick's office was a Spartan affair, containing only a desk, 2 chairs, and shelves lined with military manuals and treatises on warfare. The instructor sat behind his desk, reviewing papers by candlelight. His gray hair was cropped short in military fashion, and his weather-beaten face bore the scars of a lifetime of combat. When Kira knocked, he looked up with tired eyes. "Come in, Ashford. Sit down." Kira took the chair across from his desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. Valdrick studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "5 years I've been teaching at this academy. In that time, I've trained over 200 students. Some are naturally gifted, born with quick reflexes and an instinct for combat. Others were hardworking, making up for lack of talent with endless practice and determination. A few were both gifted and dedicated, destined to become legends." He paused, reaching for a leather folder on his desk. "And then there are students like you, Ashford. Students who—" He trailed off, seeming to reconsider his words. "Students who don't belong here," Kira finished quietly. "I know, sir. I've always known." Valdrick's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that what you think? That you don't belong here? It's obvious, isn't it? I can't fight. I can't even hold a sword properly. The other students are right. I'm dragging down the class. You'd be better off giving my spot to someone who actually has potential." The instructor leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. "Tell me something, Ashford. Why did you come to the academy?" The question caught Kira off guard. She had expected dismissal papers, not a philosophical discussion. "To become a warrior, sir. To serve the realm. That's what they all say. But why do you want to be a warrior? What drives you?" Images flashed through Kira's mind. Her village in flames, her parents' bodies lying motionless in their burning home, the terrified faces of survivors huddled in the town square. She had been helpless then, a 12-year-old girl who could only watch as raiders destroyed everything she loved. The local militia had arrived too late, finding only ashes and grief. "I want to protect people," she said simply. "I want to make sure what happened to my family never happens to anyone else." Valdrick nodded slowly. "A noble goal. But protection comes in many forms, Ashford. Not all warriors fight on the front lines with sword and shield." Before Kira could ask what he meant, there was a commotion in the hallway outside. Shouting voices echoed off the stone walls, growing closer. Valdrick frowned and stood, moving toward the door. It burst open before he could reach it, revealing a messenger in the royal colors, a young man whose face was flushed from hard riding. "Instructor Valdrick," the messenger gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "General Corrin requires all senior instructors to report to the war room immediately. There's been an attack on the northern border." Valdrick's expression hardened. "How bad?" "3 villages burned, sir. The garrison at Millbrook has gone silent. General Corrin is mobilizing every available unit. The messenger's eyes darted to Kira. He's also calling up the final-year students for emergency duty. Kira's heart leaped. Final-year students were only called up in the most desperate circumstances. If the border was under serious attack, the academy might waive normal graduation requirements. This could be her chance to prove herself, to show that she belonged despite her failings in the training yard. But Valdrick's expression suggested otherwise. Ashford, return to your dormitory. This doesn't concern you. But, sir, if they're calling up final-year students not all final-year students, Valdrick cut her off. Only those qualified for combat duty. The words stung, but they were honest. Kira couldn't argue with the logic. Sending an incompetent warrior into battle wasn't just foolish. It was potentially fatal for everyone around her. She stood slowly, her brief moment of hope crumbling into familiar disappointment. Yes, sir. As she reached the door, Valdrick called out to her. Ashford. She turned back to find him watching her with an odd expression. Your education here isn't over yet. There are many ways to serve. Kira nodded numbly and stepped into the hallway. The messenger was already heading toward the war room, his urgent footsteps echoing in the distance. She began the long walk back to her dormitory, her mind spinning with thoughts of the attack and her own uncertain future. The dormitory was in chaos when she arrived. Students rushed back and forth between rooms, gathering gear and weapons. Those who had received summons were preparing for immediate departure, their faces a mixture of excitement and fear. Those who hadn't been called looked on with envy and disappointment. Did you hear? Finn appeared at her side, his own gear already packed. They're forming emergency units to reinforce the border. Real combat experience before graduation. Kira forced a smile. That's wonderful. You'll do great out there. Finn's expression softened as he realized her situation. Oh, Kira, I'm sorry. I didn't think it's fine, she lied. I understand the decision. I'm not ready for combat. But as she watched her classmates prepare for their first real test as warriors, Kira felt something burning in her chest. Not the familiar ache of disappointment, but something fiercer. She had spent years accepting her limitations, believing what everyone told her about her lack of ability. Maybe it was time to stop accepting and start fighting back. That night, as half her class marched out of the academy gates toward the northern border, Kira made a decision. She couldn't change the past or her poor performance in training, but she could control what happened next. If the academy wouldn't give her a chance to prove herself, she would find another way. She just had to figure out what that way was. 3 days passed without word from the northern border. The academy felt like a ghost town with half the final year students gone. Those who remained attended their regular classes, but the atmosphere was tense. Instructors spoke in hushed voices in the corridors, and meals in the Great Hall were unusually quiet affairs. Kira threw herself into her academic studies with renewed intensity. If she couldn't prove herself with a sword, perhaps she could find another way to contribute. She spent hours in the academy library, reading everything she could find about border conflicts, raiding patterns, and defensive strategies. The ancient text spoke of heroes and legends, but between the lines, she found practical wisdom about warfare that went beyond simple blade work. On the fourth morning, she was deep in a treatise on siege warfare when instructor Aldrich, the Academy's master of military history, approached her table. The elderly scholar was known for his vast knowledge and his habit of seeing potential in unlikely places. Miss Ashford, he said quietly, settling into the chair across from her. I've been watching you these past few days. Your dedication to your studies is impressive. Kira looked up from her book, surprised by the interruption. Instructors rarely sought out individual students, especially ones with a reputation. Thank you, sir. I'm just trying to learn everything I can. Aldrich smiled, his weathered face creasing with genuine warmth. Knowledge is perhaps the most undervalued weapon in a warrior's arsenal. Tell me, what have you learned from your research? Well, Kira hesitated, uncertain if this was some kind of test. The northern border conflicts follow a predictable pattern. The raids typically come in waves, small probing attacks to test defenses, followed by larger strikes against weakened positions. The raiders always withdraw before reinforcements arrive, which suggests they have detailed knowledge of our response times. Interesting observation. What else? Gaining confidence, Kira continued. The attacks target specific types of settlements, usually farming communities with grain stores or mining towns with valuable metals. They avoid fortified positions and seem to know exactly which garrisons are understaffed. That level of intelligence suggests either spies within our own ranks or a much more organized enemy than we've been assuming. Aldrich nodded approvingly. Excellent analysis. You've identified patterns that some of our most experienced officers have missed. Have you shared these insights with anyone? Kira shook her head. Who would listen to me? I'm the student who can't even hold a sword properly. That may be true, Aldrich said gently, but your mind is clearly suited for strategic thinking. Combat comes in many forms, Miss Ashford. Not all battles are won with blade and shield. Before Kira could respond, a commotion erupted in the library courtyard outside. Through the tall windows, they could see a group of riders approaching the academy gates. The lead horseman carried a banner that made Kira's blood run cold. The black raven on red field that signified urgent military dispatch. Bad news, Aldrich murmured, rising from his chair. Come along, Miss Ashford. I suspect we're about to learn what happened to your classmates. They joined the crowd gathering in the academy's main courtyard as the messenger dismounted. His armor was dented and splashed with mud, suggesting a hard ride from the border. General Corrin emerged from the administrative building, his expression grim as he received the sealed dispatch. Kira watched the general's face as he read, noting how his jaw tightened and his knuckles went white around the parchment. Whatever news the message contained, it wasn't good. When he finished reading, Corrin looked up at the assembled students and instructors with haunted eyes. The reinforcement column was ambushed 20 miles north of Millbrook, he announced, his voice carrying clearly across the silent courtyard. The enemy knew exactly where they would be and when. Our forces were routed. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Someone behind Kira sobbed quietly. She felt her own knees go weak as the implications sank in. Her classmates, Finn, Marcus, Elena, all of them, had walked into a trap. Casualties? Instructor Valdrick asked, his usual stern demeanor cracking slightly. Heavy, Corrin replied grimly. We lost 60% of the column, including most of the student volunteers. The survivors are falling back to Ravenhill Fortress, but the enemy is pursuing. We expect a siege within the week. The courtyard erupted in shocked whispers and muffled cries. Students clutched each other for support as the reality of their friends' fate settled in. These weren't practice battles or training exercises. This was real war with real consequences. Kira felt numb. She thought of Finn's encouraging smile, Marcus's arrogant confidence, Elena's graceful movements. They had been so excited to finally prove themselves, to show what years of training had taught them. Now many of them were dead, and the survivors were trapped in a fortress under siege. Sir, called out one of the remaining final-year students, a young woman named Sarah Millhouse. What about the rest of us? Are we being deployed as well? Corrin's expression hardened further. Absolutely not. This enemy is too dangerous, too well-informed. I won't send more students to their deaths. His gaze swept across the crowd. All military exercises are suspended. Academic classes will continue, but no one leaves the academy grounds without explicit permission. As the crowd began to disperse, Kira found herself walking aimlessly through the academy's corridors. The news had shaken her more than she expected. She had always known that warrior training would eventually lead to real combat, but somehow it had never felt entirely real until now. The possibility of death had been abstract, something that happened to other people in distant battles. She ended up in the armory, drawn by some impulse she couldn't name. The room was filled with racks of practice weapons, swords, spears, shields, and bows. Everything was perfectly maintained, waiting for students who might never return to use them again. Kira picked up one of the wooden practice swords, feeling its familiar weight in her hands. Even now, her grip felt awkward, uncertain. She moved through the basic forms Valdric had tried to teach her, but her movements were still clumsy and uncoordinated. The weapon felt like a foreign object, something that belonged in someone else's hands. Frustrated, she spun around to find General Corin standing in the doorway, watching her with those penetrating dark eyes. Kira quickly set down the sword and snapped to attention. "Sir, I didn't hear you come in. I was just practicing." Corin finished. "Even after what happened today, you're still trying to improve your sword work." He stepped into the armory, his presence filling the space with quiet authority. Most students would be in their dormitories, grieving for their lost classmates or writing letters home to their families. Kira wasn't sure how to respond to that. The truth was, she had been too shocked to grieve properly, and she had no family to write to. Training was the only thing that felt normal, even if she was terrible at it. Corin picked up the sword she had been using, testing its balance with the casual expertise of a lifelong warrior. "I've been reviewing your academic records, Miss Ashford. Your theoretical knowledge is exceptional, some of the highest scores in academy history. Your instructors speak highly of your strategic thinking and your understanding of military logistics." "Thank you, sir," Kira replied cautiously, wondering where this conversation was heading. "Your practical combat skills, however." Corin swung the practice sword in a perfect arc, demonstrating the fluid motion that had always eluded her. "Well, Instructor Valdric has been quite clear about your limitations in that area." Heat rose in Kira's cheeks. Even the general knew about her failures. "Yes, sir. I'm aware that my sword work is inadequate." Corin set down the weapon and studied her carefully. "Tell me, Miss Ashford, what do you know about intelligence work?" The question caught her completely off guard. "Intelligence work, sir? Gathering information about enemy movements, analyzing their patterns, predicting their next moves. The kind of work that might have prevented today's disaster if we had better people doing it." Kira's mind raced. She thought about her research in the library, her analysis of raiding patterns, her observations about the enemy's apparent inside knowledge. I've done some reading about border conflicts, sir. I noticed that the attacks seem unusually well-coordinated for simple raiding parties." Corin's eyes sharpened with interest. "Go on." "The timing is too precise, the target's too specific. They know which settlements are valuable and which are defended. They know our response patterns well enough to set ambushes. Either they have spies in our ranks, or they're not the simple barbarian raiders we've been assuming. And which do you think it is?" Kira hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Both, sir. I think we're facing an organized enemy force that has also managed to place informants within our own military structure. The combination would explain how they knew exactly where and when to ambush the reinforcement column." Corin nodded slowly, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Interesting theory. Most of my senior officers are still convinced we're dealing with opportunistic raiders who got lucky. With respect, sir, luck doesn't explain the pattern of attacks over the past year. There's clear strategic planning behind these raids." "You've studied the historical patterns?" "Yes, sir. I've mapped every reported attack in the northern borderlands for the past 18 months. The progression shows increasing sophistication and coordination. This isn't random violence. It's preparation for something larger." Corin was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. Finally, he spoke again. "Miss Ashford, how would you feel about serving your kingdom in a different capacity than traditional warrior duties?" Kira's heart skipped a beat. Was he offering her some kind of alternative to the military service she had always dreamed of? "What did you have in mind, sir?" "Intelligence work requires different skills than frontline combat. Observation, analysis, the ability to see patterns others miss. It also requires people who can blend in, who don't stand out as obvious threats." His gaze took in her unremarkable appearance and slight build. People who might be overlooked or underestimated. The implication was both exciting and slightly insulting. He was essentially saying she would make a good spy because she was forgettable and non-threatening. But it was still an opportunity to serve, to make a difference in a war that had already claimed so many of her classmates. "I will be honored to serve in any capacity, sir." Cor nodded approvingly. "Good. Report to the East Tower tomorrow morning at dawn. Ask for Captain Marlowe. She runs our intelligence operations. Tell her I sent you for evaluation." As the general turned to leave, Kira found her voice again. "Sir, what about my regular classes? Consider them suspended indefinitely. If Captain Marlowe agrees with my assessment, you'll be starting a very different kind of education." He paused at the doorway. "Miss Ashford, the work I'm proposing is dangerous in ways that frontline combat is not. Are you prepared for that?" Kira thought about her dead parents, her failed training, her classmates who might be dying in a besieged fortress at that very moment. "Yes, sir. I'm prepared." After Corin left, Kira remained in the armory for a long time, staring at the practice weapons that had never felt right in her hands. Maybe she wasn't meant to be a warrior in the traditional sense. Maybe her path lay elsewhere, in shadows and secrets rather than open battle. The thought should have been disappointing, but instead she felt a strange sense of rightness, as if puzzle pieces were finally clicking into place. She had always been better with her mind than her sword arm. Perhaps it was time to stop fighting against her nature and start using it to her advantage. That night, Kira packed her few belongings with careful deliberation. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt like she might finally have found her place. The girl who couldn't swing a sword properly might yet find a way to serve her kingdom and honor her fallen classmates. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought about the secret mark she had noticed on some of the Academy's older documents, a small symbol that appeared on certain sensitive materials. She had never understood its significance, but something told her she would learn more about such things very soon. The path of the spy was about to begin. Dawn came gray and cold as Kira made her way to the East Tower. She had barely slept, her mind churning with questions about what lay ahead. The tower stood apart from the main academy buildings, its dark stone weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Unlike the rest of the academy, which bustled with activity even in the early hours, this section felt abandoned and forgotten. The heavy wooden door at the tower's base was locked, with no obvious way to announce her presence. Kira knocked tentatively, the sound echoing hollowly in the empty courtyard. For several minutes, nothing happened. She was beginning to wonder if she had misunderstood the general's instructions when the door suddenly swung open. The woman who greeted her was nothing like what Kira had expected. Captain Marlowe appeared to be in her 30s, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple braid and brown eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of Kira's appearance in a single glance. She wore civilian clothes, a simple dark dress that could have belonged to any merchant or craftsman's wife. There was nothing about her that suggested military rank or dangerous secrets. "Miss Ashford, I presume," Marlowe said, her voice carrying a slight accent that Kira couldn't place. "The general mentioned you might be paying us a visit. Please come in." The interior of the tower was as unremarkable as its occupant. The first floor contained what appeared to be a small library, with shelves of books covering topics ranging from trade routes to agricultural yields. A few comfortable chairs were arranged around a simple table, and morning light streamed through clean but unadorned windows. It could have been the study of any minor scholar or clerk. "Tea," Marlowe offered, gesturing toward a service set on a side table. "Thank you," Kira replied, though she was too nervous to actually want anything to drink. Marlowe poured 2 cups with practiced ease, her movements economical and precise. Everything about her suggested competence without calling attention to itself. Exactly the kind of person who could disappear into any crowd. As she handed Kira her tea, their fingers briefly touched, and Kira was startled by the calluses she felt. Whatever Captain Marlowe's duties involved, they weren't purely academic. "So," Marlowe said, settling into the chair across from her, General Corin tells me you have an unusual perspective on our current border troubles. He seems to think you might be suited for our kind of work. I'm not entirely sure what your kind of work involves, Kira admitted. The general mentioned intelligence gathering, but I don't really know what that means in practice. Marlowe smiled, and for a moment her carefully neutral expression became genuinely warm. Honest answer. That's good. We have no use for people who pretend to know more than they do. She sipped her tea thoughtfully. Intelligence work is about understanding things that others want to keep hidden. It requires patience, observation, and the ability to piece together incomplete information to form accurate conclusions. Like solving puzzles? Exactly like solving puzzles. Except the pieces are scattered across multiple sources. Some of them are deliberately false, and people will kill you if they realize what you're doing. The casual mention of danger made Kira's stomach flutter, but she tried to keep her expression steady. I understand the risks, Captain. I want to contribute to the war effort. Marlowe set down her cup and studied Kira with those perceptive brown eyes. Tell me about your analysis of the border raids. I want to hear your reasoning process, not just your conclusions. For the next hour, Kira explained her research in detail. She described the patterns she had identified, the questions that had occurred to her, and the conclusions she had drawn from seemingly unrelated pieces of information. Marlowe listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small leather journal. Impressive, Marlowe said when Kira finished. You've identified connections that took our experienced analysts weeks to notice. More importantly, you've asked the right questions. She closed her journal and leaned forward slightly. However, intelligence work requires more than analytical ability. It requires skills that aren't taught in traditional military academies. What kind of skills? The ability to lie convincingly. The patience to maintain false identities for weeks or months. The nerve to smile and make pleasant conversation with people you know are enemies. The willingness to betray trust if necessary. Marlowe's expression became serious. These things don't come naturally to most people, Miss Ashford. They certainly don't come naturally to people with strong moral principles. Kira thought about her parents, about her classmates who had died in the ambush, about the survivors trapped in Ravenhill Fortress. If it helps protect innocent people and serves my kingdom, I can learn to do what's necessary. Marlowe nodded slowly. Perhaps you can, but learning and actually doing are different things. Would you be willing to undergo an evaluation period? A few weeks of training to see if you're actually suited for this work. Yes, Captain. Absolutely. Good. Marlowe stood and walked to one of the bookshelves, removing what appeared to be a volume on grain production. When she opened it, Kira saw that the interior had been hollowed out to create a hiding place for documents. Your first lesson begins now. Everything you see and hear in this tower is classified. You will not discuss it with anyone, not even General Corin, without explicit permission. Violating that trust would have severe consequences. I understand. Marlowe returned to her seat with a thin folder. Your first assignment is to learn everything you can about the town of Millbrook. Official records, trade relationships, notable residents, recent changes in routine, anything that might explain how the enemy knew to target it specifically. She handed Kira the folder, which contained maps, census data, and various reports dating back several years. You have 3 days to complete your analysis. I want a written report identifying any factors that might have made Millbrook attractive to raiders or vulnerable to attack. Kira opened the folder eagerly, her mind already beginning to process the information. Should I focus on any particular aspects? That's for you to determine. Part of intelligence work is knowing what questions to ask. Marlowe's expression became thoughtful. Miss Ashford, may I ask you something personal? Of course. Why are you so determined to serve in a military capacity? Most young women in your position would have other options: marriage, trade, scholarship. What drives you to choose this dangerous path? The question brought back memories Kira usually tried to suppress. When I was 12, raiders attacked my village. They killed my parents and burned everything I cared about. I survived by hiding in a grain cellar while my world was destroyed above me. She met Marlowe's gaze steadily. I swore that day that I would become strong enough to protect others from experiencing what I went through. And when you proved unable to master traditional combat skills, I looked for another way to become strong. Kira's voice grew firm. Strength comes in many forms, Captain. If I can't protect people with a sword, perhaps I can protect them with information and intelligence instead. Marlowe was quiet for a long moment, studying Kira with an unreadable expression. Finally, she nodded. Very well. Report back here in 3 days with your analysis. In the meantime, continue attending your regular classes as if nothing has changed. Tell anyone who asks that you're doing independent study on border geography. As Kira prepared to leave, Marlowe called her back. One more thing, Miss Ashford. You mentioned that your parents were killed in a raid. Do you remember any details about the attackers? Anything that struck you as unusual at the time? The question surprised her. It was 5 years ago, Captain. I was just a child, and I was hiding most of the time. Children often notice things that adults miss. They observe without the preconceptions that come with experience. Kira closed her eyes, forcing herself to remember that terrible day. They were organized, she said slowly. Not like the drunken bandits I had expected. They moved with purpose like soldiers. And she paused, a half-remembered detail surfacing from the traumatic memories. One of them had a mark on his neck. A tattoo or brand, I think. It looked like a bird, maybe a raven. Marlowe's expression sharpened with interest. A raven? You're certain? I think so. Why? Is it significant? Perhaps. Thank you for sharing that detail, Miss Ashford. Memory has a way of preserving important information even when we don't realize its value at the time. Kira left the tower with more questions than answers, but for the first time in months, she felt genuinely hopeful about her future. The work ahead would be challenging and dangerous, but it played to her strengths rather than highlighting her weaknesses. Intelligence gathering required the kind of careful observation and analytical thinking that came naturally to her. She spent the rest of the morning in her regular classes, but her mind was focused on the folder hidden in her dormitory room. The details of Millbrook's recent history would have to wait until she could study them properly, but already she was forming theories about what she might find. During the midday meal, she found herself observing her fellow students with new eyes. How many secrets did each person carry? How much could she learn about them simply by watching their behavior and listening to their conversations? Everyone was a puzzle to be solved, a collection of clues waiting to be interpreted. You look different today, observed Sarah Millhouse, sliding onto the bench beside her. Sarah was one of the few final-year students who hadn't been called up for the disastrous reinforcement mission, having been recovering from a training injury at the time. Different how? Kira asked, suddenly, aware that her new perspective might be showing in ways she hadn't intended. I don't know. More focused, maybe? Like you found something you've been looking for. Sarah's expression became curious. Are you working on something special? Some kind of project? The innocent question felt like a test of her new discretion. Just some independent study. Military history and geography. Sounds boring. Sarah made a face. I don't know how you can stand all that academic stuff. Give me a sword and something to fight, and I'm happy. Kira smiled, remembering when she had thought the same way. Different people have different strengths. That afternoon, she managed to slip away to her dormitory room during a break between classes. The folder Marlowe had given her contained far more information than she had expected. Detailed maps of Millbrook and the surrounding area, census records going back 10 years, trade manifests, tax collection reports, and even personal correspondence from the town's mayor to various regional officials. As she spread the documents across her desk, patterns began to emerge. Millbrook wasn't just another farming community. It was a crucial junction point for several important trade routes. Caravans carrying grain, metals, and luxury goods all passed through the town on their way to larger markets. More importantly, the town served as a staging area for military supplies heading to border fortresses. But there were inconsistencies in the records that troubled her. Recent trade manifests showed unusual fluctuations in certain types of cargo, more weapons, and armor passing through than the official military requisitions could account for. Some of the names on shipping documents appeared multiple times with slightly different spellings, suggesting false identities or coded communications. Most intriguingly, she found references to a new merchant who had established himself in Millbrook just 6 months before the raids began. Anton Blackwood claimed to be a trader in fine goods, but his business activities didn't match the pattern of his supposed specialty. According to the records, he was importing raw materials and exporting finished products, the reverse of what a luxury goods merchant should be doing. Kira made careful notes, cross-referencing dates and names, building a timeline of events leading up to the town's destruction. The more she learned, the more convinced she became that Millbrook had been targeted not for what it contained, but for what it knew. Someone had been using the town as a base of operations, and the raid had been designed to eliminate evidence as much as to steal supplies. By evening, she had filled several pages with observations and theories. Her analysis was incomplete. She would need at least another day to trace all the connections she had identified, but already she could see the outline of something much larger than simple border raids. As she prepared for sleep, Kira reflected on how much her life had changed in a single day. This morning, she had been a failed warrior student with no clear future. Tonight, she was an intelligence trainee working on her first real assignment. The transformation felt surreal, but also inevitable, as if she had finally found the path she was meant to follow. She carefully hid the folder and her notes, using techniques Marlowe had taught her during their brief conversation. Even in the academy dormitories, secrets required protection. Tomorrow, she would continue her analysis, digging deeper into the mysteries surrounding Millbrook's destruction. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Kira felt like she was exactly where she belonged. 2 days into her investigation of Millbrook, Kira discovered something that made her blood run cold. Hidden in the financial records was a pattern of payments that could only mean one thing. The town had been sold out from within. She sat in her dormitory room in the pre-dawn darkness, surrounded by documents spread across every available surface. Her eyes burned from hours of careful analysis, but sleep was impossible. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, and the picture they revealed was far more sinister than she had imagined. Anton Blackwood, the mysterious merchant who had arrived 6 months before the raid, had been making regular payments to several townspeople. The amounts were small enough to avoid attention, but consistent enough to suggest ongoing services rather than simple business transactions. More damning still, the timing of these payments corresponded exactly with military supply movements through the town. Kira had spent the previous evening creating a detailed timeline, correlating Blackwood's activities with every known military operation in the region. Every time troops moved through Millbrook, every time weapons shipments arrived, every time strategic information passed through the town's administrative offices, Blackwood somehow knew about it. The man wasn't just a spy, he was running an entire intelligence network. But the most chilling discovery had come just hours ago, when Kira finally managed to decode a series of cryptic notations in Blackwood's personal correspondence. The merchant hadn't just been gathering information about military movements. He had been specifically tracking the Academy's reinforcement plans, down to the exact routes and timing that would later be used for the fatal ambush. Her classmates hadn't died in an unfortunate encounter with opportunistic raiders. They had been deliberately led into a trap by someone who knew every detail of their mission before they ever left the Academy gates. The realization made her feel sick, but it also filled her with cold determination. Whoever was responsible for this betrayal would pay for what they had done. A soft knock at her door interrupted her dark thoughts. Kira quickly gathered the most sensitive documents and hid them in the secret compartment Marlowe had taught her to create. When she opened the door, she found Instructor Valdrick standing in the hallway, his weathered face creased with concern. "Miss Ashford," he said quietly, "may I come in? There's something we need to discuss." Kira's heart raced as she stepped aside to let him enter. Had someone discovered her intelligence work? Was her cover already blown? She tried to keep her expression neutral as Valdrick closed the door behind him and turned to face her. "I've been reviewing the Academy's personnel files," he said without preamble. "Specifically, I've been looking into anyone who might have had access to the reinforcement mission's operational details." The statement hit Kira like a physical blow. Valdrick was investigating the same security breach she had uncovered through her Millbrook research. Either he was working independently toward the same conclusion, or her mind raced through the possibilities, none of them good. "Sir," she managed to say, buying time while she tried to figure out how much he knew. Valdrick studied her carefully, his gray eyes sharp with intelligence. "I know about your meetings with Captain Marlowe, Kira. I know you've been given intelligence training assignments. What I don't know is whether you've discovered anything that might be relevant to my investigation." The admission caught her completely off guard. She had assumed her work with Marlowe was secret from everyone except General Corrin. The fact that Valdrick knew about it suggested either a serious security problem or a level of coordination between different parts of the military that she hadn't understood. "How did you—" she began, then stopped herself. Questions could wait. If Valdrick was investigating the same conspiracy she had uncovered, he might be the ally she desperately needed. "Your academic schedule has been completely disrupted for the past 3 days, Valdrick explained. "You've missed sword training, tactical exercises, and military law lectures. Yet none of your instructors received notification of special assignments or medical leave." It wasn't difficult to deduce that something unusual was happening. Kira made a quick decision. If Valdrick was part of the conspiracy, he already knew enough to destroy her. If he wasn't, he might be able to help her prevent further disasters like the one that had killed her classmates. "I've been analyzing the Millbrook situation," she said carefully. "I found evidence that the town was being used as a spy base by enemy agents." Valdrick's expression intensified. "What kind of evidence?" For the next 30 minutes, Kira laid out everything she had discovered. The suspicious merchant, the pattern of payments, the correlation between his activities and military movements, and, most crucially, the advanced knowledge of the reinforcement mission's details. Valdrick listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly just absorbing the information with growing alarm. "This is worse than I feared," he said finally. "If your analysis is correct, we're not dealing with a simple intelligence leak. We're looking at a comprehensive espionage network that has been operating for months, possibly years." "Sir, there's something else." Kira hesitated, then decided to share her most dangerous conclusion. "The level of access required to obtain the reinforcement mission details suggests that the leak is coming from within the Academy itself. Someone with high-level clearance has been providing information to enemy agents." Valdrick was quiet for a long moment, his face grave. "I've reached the same conclusion through a different line of investigation. The question is, who do we trust with this information? If there's a traitor in our ranks, we can't be certain that any official channels are secure." "Captain Marlowe seems trustworthy," Kira offered. "Perhaps. But intelligence operatives are trained to appear trustworthy to everyone, including their own allies. We need to be very careful about who we involve in this investigation." Before Kira could respond, they were interrupted by a commotion in the hallway outside. Voices were shouting, and she could hear the sound of running footsteps on stone floors. Valdrick moved quickly to the window, peering out into the pre-dawn darkness. "Emergency assembly," he said grimly. "All students and faculty are being called to the main courtyard. Something's happened." They joined the stream of people making their way through the Academy's corridors. Students emerged from their dormitories in various states of dress, some still pulling on robes over their nightclothes. Faculty members hurried alongside them, their faces tense with worry. The atmosphere was charged with the kind of urgent energy that accompanied truly serious news. The main courtyard was already crowded by the time they arrived. General Corrin stood on the steps of the administrative building, flanked by several senior officers Kira didn't recognize. Their expressions were grim, and she noticed that many of them wore travel-stained uniforms suggesting recent arrival from the field. "Citizens of the Royal Academy," Corrin's voice carried clearly across the assembled crowd. "I bring news from the northern border. Ravenhill Fortress has fallen. Gasps and cries of dismay erupted throughout the courtyard. Kira felt her knees go weak as the implications sank in. Ravenhill had been the stronghold where the survivors of the ambush had taken refuge. If it had fallen, that meant the siege lasted 4 days. Corin continued, his voice heavy with grief. Our forces fought bravely, but the enemy's knowledge of the fortress's defenses was too complete. They knew exactly where to concentrate their attacks, which walls were weakest, which gates could be breached most easily. Again, the enemy had possessed detailed intelligence about military positions and capabilities. The pattern was becoming unmistakable. Someone was providing them with comprehensive information about every aspect of the kingdom's defenses. "What about survivors?" called out one of the instructors. Corin's expression became even more grave. 17 soldiers managed to escape during the final assault. Among them was Cadet Finnegan Blackwood, who carried crucial intelligence about the enemy's capabilities and organization. Kira's heart leaped at the mention of Finn's name. Her friend had survived both the ambush and the siege. But something about the general's tone suggested that his survival had come at a terrible cost. Cadet Blackwood is currently being treated for severe injuries at the military hospital in Crescent Falls, Corin continued. He has provided us with valuable information about the enemy's true nature and objectives. Based on his intelligence, I can confirm that we are not dealing with simple raiders or opportunistic bandits. The general paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd. We are facing a coordinated invasion by the Northern Confederation, using tactics and intelligence capabilities that suggest months or years of preparation. This is not a border conflict. It is the opening phase of a full-scale war. The announcement hit the crowd like a physical blow. Students looked at each other with shocked expressions, while faculty members began urgent whispered conversations. The kingdom hadn't faced a major war in over 50 years. Most people in the courtyard had never imagined they might live through such events. Effective immediately, Corin continued, the Royal Academy is being placed on a war footing. All leaves are canceled, all non-essential activities are suspended, and security protocols are being enhanced. Additionally, graduation requirements are being modified to allow qualified final-year students to enter active service immediately. He gestured toward the officers flanking him. These gentlemen represent various military commands that are seeking trained personnel to fill critical roles in the war effort. Over the next week, they will be conducting interviews with eligible students to determine appropriate assignments. As the assembly began to disperse, Kira found herself walking back toward the dormitories in a daze. Everything had changed again, just when she had begun to find her place in the intelligence service. Now there was an actual war to fight, and her kingdom would need every capable person in whatever role they could best serve. Miss Ashford. The voice belonged to one of the visiting officers, a middle-aged woman with colonel's insignia and intelligent eyes. I wonder if I might have a word with you. Kira glanced around, noticing that Valdrick had disappeared into the crowd, and that most of the other students had already moved on. Being singled out by a strange officer couldn't be a coincidence. Colonel, she began. Colonel Thorne, Military Intelligence Division. The woman's smile was friendly but professional. General Corin has spoken highly of your analytical abilities. I understand you've been doing some research on border security issues. The question felt like a test, though Kira wasn't sure what the right answer might be. I've been studying historical patterns of conflict in the Northern Territories, she said carefully. Historical patterns can be very revealing, Thorne agreed, especially when they help us understand current events. I wonder if you might be interested in continuing that kind of work in a more formal capacity? Before Kira could answer, she noticed a familiar figure approaching from across the courtyard. Captain Marlowe walked toward them with purposeful strides, her usual unremarkable appearance somehow transformed into something more authoritative and dangerous. Colonel Thorne, Marlowe said as she reached them, I see you've already introduced yourself to Miss Ashford. Captain Marlowe, Thorne replied, and Kira detected a subtle tension between the two women. I was just discussing potential opportunities with your protege here. Miss Ashford is still in training, Marlowe said firmly. Any decisions about her future assignments will need to go through proper channels. Thorne's smile became slightly less friendly. Of course, proper channels are so important, aren't they? Especially in times like these, when it can be difficult to know which channels are truly secure. The exchange seemed laden with hidden meaning, but before Kira could analyze it further, both officers were looking at her expectantly. Miss Ashford, Marlowe said, please report to my office this afternoon. We have much to discuss in light of recent developments. As the two women walked away in different directions, Kira realized that her investigation of Millbrook had opened doors she hadn't expected. The war was creating opportunities, but it was also creating dangers. In the complex game of intelligence and counterintelligence that was beginning to unfold, she would need to be very careful about choosing sides. She thought about the secret mark she had glimpsed on various documents during her research, the small symbol that seemed to appear wherever sensitive information was involved. Soon, she suspected she would learn what that mark truly meant and why it was so carefully protected. The afternoon meeting with Captain Marlowe would change everything, but first Kira had to survive the most dangerous conversation of her life. She was walking toward the East Tower when Instructor Valdrick intercepted her again, his expression urgent and troubled. Without a word, he guided her away from the main paths into a secluded alcove between two administrative buildings. We have a problem, he said quietly, checking to ensure they weren't overheard. I've been making discreet inquiries about the intelligence leaks, and I've learned something disturbing. Colonel Thorne isn't who she claims to be. Kira felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? Real Colonel Thorne died 3 months ago in a carriage accident near the eastern border. Military intelligence has been covering up her death while they investigated suspicious circumstances around the incident. Valdrick's expression was grim. The woman you spoke with this morning is an imposter. The implications hit Kira like a physical blow. An enemy agent had infiltrated the academy itself, using the confusion of the war declaration to move freely among students and faculty. Worse, the imposter had specifically sought her out, which meant her intelligence activities were no longer secret. She knows about my research, Kira said, her voice barely above a whisper. She mentioned my analytical work specifically, which means the real conspiracy goes even deeper than we thought. Someone told her to approach you. Someone who knew about your assignment to investigate Millbrook. Valdrick paused, his face troubled. Someone who has been watching you work for Captain Marlowe. Before Kira could respond, they heard footsteps approaching. She looked up to see the false Colonel Thorne walking toward them with 2 men in military uniforms. Their casual approach didn't fool her. She could see the tension in their movements, the way their hands stayed near their weapons. Miss Ashford, Thorne called out pleasantly. How fortunate to find you here. These gentlemen would like to ask you a few questions about your historical research. Valdrick stepped slightly forward, positioning himself between Kira and the approaching officers. I'm afraid Miss Ashford has an appointment with her academic advisor. Perhaps these questions could wait for a more appropriate time. Thorne's smile never wavered, but her eyes became cold and calculating. I'm afraid these matters can't wait. Instructor Valdrick. Miss Ashford has uncovered some very sensitive information that requires immediate clarification. The words confirmed Kira's worst fears. They knew exactly what she had discovered about Millbrook, about the spy network, about the intelligence leaks. The question was whether they planned to recruit her to their cause or eliminate her as a threat. Run, Valdrick said quietly, his hand moving to his sword hilt. Get to Captain Marlowe. Tell her about the imposter. How touching, Thorne observed. A failed instructor protecting a failed student. I'm afraid neither of you will be leaving this courtyard. The 2 men with her moved forward, their own weapons becoming visible. But before they could close the distance, a crossbow bolt sprouted from the chest of the nearest man. He looked down in surprise, then collapsed to the cobblestones. Academy security, a voice shouted from the rooftop above them. Stand down and identify yourselves. Chaos erupted in the small courtyard. The false thorn drew a curved blade that definitely wasn't Regulation Academy equipment, while her remaining companion produced a throwing knife. Valdrick's sword cleared its scabbard with practiced speed, and suddenly, the quiet alcove became a battleground. Kira pressed herself against the stone wall, trying to stay out of the way while her mind raced. The arrival of Academy security suggested that someone else had been watching the Watchers, but she couldn't tell if that was good or bad for her situation. More crossbow bolts rained down from the rooftops, forcing the enemy agents to seek cover behind a stone pillar. But they were clearly experienced fighters, and Kira realized that Valdrick was outmatched despite his skill. The instructor was holding his own, but barely, and it was only a matter of time before numbers and desperation gave the advantage to their attackers. That's when Captain Marlowe appeared. She seemed to materialize out of nowhere, moving with deadly grace that belied her ordinary appearance. The knife that appeared in her hand wasn't the kind of weapon carried by clerks or scholars, and she used it with surgical precision. The false colonel's remaining companion went down before he even realized she was there. Thorn spun to face this new threat, her blade weaving patterns in the air that spoke of extensive training in exotic fighting techniques. But Marlowe moved like flowing water, avoiding each strike while gradually working closer to her target. Impressive, Thorn said through gritted teeth. I should have realized that Captain Marlowe would be more than she appeared, and I should have realized that our enemies would be bold enough to infiltrate the Academy itself. Marlowe replied, her voice calm despite the deadly dance she was performing. Though I admit, impersonating a dead officer was creative. Their blades met in a shower of sparks, and Kira found herself watching a level of combat that made her Academy training look like children playing with sticks. These were true masters, fighters whose skills had been honed through years of deadly serious practice. But the false colonel was beginning to show signs of strain. Marlowe's defense was perfect, turning aside every attack while steadily forcing her opponent to give ground. More importantly, the crossbow teams on the rooftops had clear shots now that the melee had separated into distinct combats. This isn't over, Thorn snarled, producing something from her belt that looked like a small glass sphere. The network is larger than you imagine, and we know everything about your precious intelligence operations. She hurled the sphere at the ground between them. It shattered on impact, releasing a thick cloud of acrid smoke that immediately began to spread throughout the courtyard. Kira's eyes began to water, and she found herself coughing violently as the chemical fumes filled her lungs. When the smoke finally cleared, the false colonel had vanished. Valdrick was leaning against the wall, clutching a bleeding arm but otherwise intact. The two enemy agents lay motionless on the cobblestones, and the courtyard was filling with authentic Academy security personnel who looked both alert and confused. Are you hurt? Marlowe asked Kira, her manner once again becoming that of a concerned instructor rather than a deadly operative. No, Kira managed to say, though her voice was hoarse from the smoke. But she said the network knows about our intelligence operations. How is that possible? Marlowe's expression became thoughtful and troubled. It's possible because the enemy has been playing a deeper game than we realized. Miss Ashford, I think it's time you learned the full truth about what's been happening here. An hour later, Kira sat in a completely different room than the one where she had first met Captain Marlowe. This chamber was hidden deep within the Academy's foundations, accessible only through concealed passages and protected by guards she hadn't even noticed until they revealed themselves. The walls were lined with maps, documents, and equipment that spoke of serious intelligence work carried out over many years. The Royal Intelligence Service has been operating from this academy for over a decade, Marlowe explained, settling into a chair across from Kira. We chose this location because it provides perfect cover for our activities while giving us access to the kingdom's best young minds. You're not really a captain, are you? Kira asked. I'm a captain, but my service predates my assignment here by many years. Like you, I began my career in ways that didn't match traditional expectations. Marlowe smiled slightly. I was once considered a failed diplomat. Too direct, too unwilling to accept comfortable lies, too interested in finding the truth even when it was inconvenient. The parallel wasn't lost on Kira. So you recruited me because you saw potential that others missed? I recruited you because you have a gift for seeing patterns and asking the right questions. But also because you have something else that's extremely rare in our profession, genuine moral courage. Marlowe's expression became serious. What I'm about to tell you will change how you see everything, including yourself. Are you prepared for that? Kira thought about everything that had happened over the past week. Her failed warrior training, her classmates' deaths, her investigation of Millbrook, and now the discovery of enemy agents within the academy itself. I don't think I have a choice anymore. Marlowe nodded and walked to a secure cabinet, withdrawing a leather portfolio sealed with wax. When she broke the seal and opened it, Kira saw documents marked with the same mysterious symbol she had noticed throughout her research. This mark, Marlowe said, pointing to the symbol, identifies members of the Order of the Hidden Shield. We are the kingdom's most elite intelligence operatives, tasked with protecting the realm from threats that conventional military forces cannot address. She handed Kira a small silver pendant bearing the same mark, a stylized shield with a raven perched above it. Your parents wore this symbol, Miss Ashford. They died protecting information that would have compromised the safety of dozens of towns along the border. The world seemed to tilt around Kira as the implications sank in. My parents were spies? Your parents were heroes who gave their lives to protect thousands of innocent people. The raid that killed them wasn't random. It was specifically designed to eliminate them before they could report what they had learned about enemy plans. Marlowe's voice became gentle. They hid information in your village that we recovered after their death. Intelligence that allowed us to prevent a much larger attack that would have devastated the entire region. Kira stared at the pendant, her mind reeling. Everything she thought she knew about her past was wrong. Her parents hadn't been victims of random violence. They had been soldiers in a secret war, protecting their kingdom through courage and sacrifice. The mark you remembered seeing on one of the raiders, Marlowe continued, was the symbol of the Northern Confederation's intelligence service. They had come specifically to eliminate your parents, and they succeeded. But not before your mother managed to hide the most crucial intelligence in a place where we could find it. Where? Kira whispered. Sewn into the lining of your favorite childhood cloak, the one you were wearing when the village elder found you hiding in the grain cellar. Marlowe smiled sadly. You've been carrying your parents' final mission with you all these years without knowing it. The pendant felt warm in Kira's hand, as if it still carried some essence of the parents she had lost. Why are you telling me this now? Because the enemy knows who you are. The false colonel wasn't here by coincidence. She was specifically hunting for the daughter of Marcus and Elena Ashford, two of our most successful agents. Marlowe's expression became grim. They believe you might have inherited your parents' abilities, or that you might have knowledge about their final mission. But I don't know anything about their work. Perhaps not consciously, but you've demonstrated the same analytical gifts, the same instinct for uncovering hidden truths. More importantly, you've shown the same moral courage that drove them to risk everything for the protection of others. Marlowe leaned forward. Miss Ashford, Kira, I'm offering you the chance to complete your parents' work, to join the Order of the Hidden Shield, and help us protect the kingdom from the conspiracy that killed them. Kira looked down at the silver pendant, thinking about everything she had learned and everything she had lost. Her parents hadn't been helpless victims after all. They had been warriors in the truest sense, fighting battles that others never even knew existed. The failed sword training, the humiliation in the practice yards, the sense of not belonging, none of it mattered anymore. What would I have to do, she asked. Learn to be someone else when necessary. Master skills that aren't taught in normal academies. Accept assignments that might keep you away from home for months or years. Face dangers that could cost you everything, including your life. Marlowe's voice was steady and honest. In exchange, you would have the chance to prevent tragedies like the one that destroyed your village. To protect innocent people from enemies they never see coming. Kira closed her fingers around the pendant, feeling its edges bite into her palm. My classmates who died in the ambush, was that connected to this conspiracy? We believe so. The intelligence that led to their deaths came from someone within our own ranks. Someone who has been feeding information to the Northern Confederation for months or possibly years. Marlowe's expression hardened. Finding and stopping that traitor is now our highest priority. Then, I accept, Kira said firmly. I want to join the order. I want to finish what my parents started. Marlowe nodded approvingly. Very well. But understand that from this moment forward, Kira Ashford, the failed warrior, student ceases to exist. You will become someone new, someone whose past is carefully constructed and whose future is dedicated to serving the realm in ways that can never be acknowledged or rewarded. As Kira fastened the pendant around her neck, feeling it settle against her skin like a promise, she realized that she had finally found her true calling. She might never be the traditional warrior she had dreamed of becoming, but she will be something even more important, a guardian in the shadows, protecting those who could not protect themselves. The general who would soon recognize her true value was waiting somewhere in their future. But first, she had a conspiracy to unravel and a traitor to find. The failed warrior was dead. The spy had been born.